Hi everyone, I'm Cindy Barber, and I am so excited to be here. But you know what time it is? It's time to write the book.
Before I get into the details on the book, I want to share with you the three events that would shape the book and the way that it came about. The first event was a visit from my niece, and she said those magic words, "Aunt Cindy, I'm interested in this genealogy thing you do." I was so happy. So I went in and I fired up my computer and I showed her the pedigree charts and I showed her the family group sheets and I started telling her about each grandparent and great-grandparent and great-grandparent, and her eyes glazed over. Now she didn't fall asleep, but she could have. And I could see that her eyes were darting around the room, frantically trying to figure out how to get out of this conversation. And then there was whining. "But Aunt Cindy, what about the stories?" And so I dug down in my memory and I thought of the people that she knew in her life and I started telling the stories. And we sat down in the living room and over a glass of wine, I told her stories and answered questions for 2 days. And this was my epiphany. I knew that the book couldn't be a standard genealogy collection of family group sheets or descendant charts or anything like that. This book had to encompass the stories. The second event that shaped our future book was not a genealogy event at all. We have a friend who's a world traveler. She's been everywhere. But one time when we were talking to her, we found out that she'd never been to a rodeo. And we went to a rodeo almost every year on July 4th weekend. So we invited her to fly into Rapid City, South Dakota, and attend a rodeo with us. Now, we had a reunion we were going to the end of August, so the rodeo trip turned into a 56-day trip in our RV. We had a great time, and we saw some wonderful things. And I knew that I wanted to make her a book to commemorate this trip. I wanted it to be soft so she could sit in her recliner and thumb through the book whenever she wanted to. At the same time, I got an advertisement from a book publishing software, and I used that software to create the book. On this page layout, you can see the purple. That's the no print zone. So all I had to do was put my pictures and my text in the no print zone, and everything would come out fine. You'll notice also that this isn't a blow-by-blow description of the trip. It's pictures and memory triggers. I wanted to trigger her memory because her memories are going to be different than our memories. She did spend some time outside of the RV in B&Bs, and she had some different experiences than we did. So I wanted the book to be a memory trigger and not a blow-by-blow description of the book, of the trip. It came out great, and it let me learn how to use the software company. The third event that shaped this future book was actually from a client. They came to me and asked me if I could find out about their mother. Now, this was a set of twins. Neither of them had any children, but they wanted to know more about their mother. And so I went gathering information, and I found some cool immigrant ancestor stories. I worked this up in just Microsoft Word in the booklet format as a draft, really. And you can see this is a sample of the page. I have a graphic at the top that shows the person that the page is about and then their parents. I made a very simple graphic so you could see who you were talking about. And then I put graphics and text on the page. I actually did the father plus 2 generations and the mother plus 4 generations. I wanted to include their father so I could bring them in as a couple. I found school articles. One of the neatest things I found was actually in a class book. I found a page of the class book that their mother had signed, put a note and signed for her friend. So they had a picture of their mother's signature. And I went looking for things that uncommon things that the girls may not have even known. Like their mother was in a writing club, and they never even knew their mother rode. And then I've had some unexpected great finds along the way. Thorn, their great-grandfather, had been a ship's captain and a harbor pilot in Norway, so I got to learn all about Norway and the ships in the harbor. They immigrated to the United States and they ended up in Minnesota. Now, they knew that they had great-grandparents who were farmers in Minnesota. Well, come to find out, they weren't farmers, but for a very short time. I don't think farming was really their thing, and Thorn ended up as a clerk in the city. And Thorn's son went into the seminary, and he later taught in the seminary, but he wrote poetry. And he wrote a poem that's in a book called The Pilot's Christmas. It's a wonderful, beautiful poem about the ship's pilot, who goes out to work on Christmas Day. And this book was available on Google Books, and I was able to download the book and give it to them. Their other great-grandfather was Swedish, and he worked for American Can, and he was an inventor. He held patents for American Can, for canning and cans, the little actual food cans themselves. But then I tripped across a group of patents for clocks and cameras. And overall, I found 21 patents in his name. So clocks and cameras must have been his hobby. This picture from the patent that is on the screen is actually for his electric clock winding mechanism. I was so excited because I'm really interested in engineering. And so I went into great detail and started collecting the patents and talking about the patents. And I was talking to the girls, and they went, ho-hum, yeah, we knew he had a bunch of patents, but we're really not too interested in it. So the patents didn't make the book. But I had a good time. So what these projects did was it let me learn first how to use the book software and how to put a book together in a simple format. And it also drove home the importance of knowing your audience. If I'd written the book on their mother and put all that information on the patents, they wouldn't have liked the book. Life goes on, and I'm pursuing research and doing other things, and then I get the call. Now, my cousin Jim has been the hub of our cousin network of researchers for years. And Jim called me, and the call went something like this. Cindy, do you remember the 7 sons? And I said vaguely, you know I don't like working with modern people. He goes, but James Z. family, he's your great-grandfather. And I said, but Jim, I'm working on the Maryland State Archives and reading 1700s court documents. I'm busy. And there was silence. And Jim goes, it's time to write the book. And so we did. Now, Jim has a picture of James Z. and his 7 sons that he absolutely loves. It's a wonderful picture. You can see James Z.'s in the middle there, and the 7 sons are surrounding him. So we had a theme for the book. We had an inspiration piece, and we had a title, a working title, The 7 Sons. And we were going to write this book on the 7 sons. So before we could start writing the book, we had to think about what was going to be in the book. So we had a title. I knew there'd be a table of contents. I just didn't know what it would look like at this point. But the most important things we had to talk about was scope. What was going to be in the book? Well, obviously the 7 sons. But how many generations down were we going to go? If we tried to capture all the current generations, we'd be wrong as soon as somebody had a baby. And we had some privacy concerns to talk about. But one of the biggest things that came up was cost. I went, well, Jim, just how much do you want to spend for this book? Because how much it costs drives how many pages we can have, which then drives what can be in the book. And so we had many, many discussions about what was going to be in the book and how we were going to handle it. And as we talked, the real reason for the book came up. He wanted it to be a gift to his kids and grandkids for Christmas. So I now had a timeline. So not only did we know our title, we knew when we had to have it done by, able to go out to people by. So we had some parameters there. But we also knew kids and grandkids, not genealogists. None of them were into genealogy. None of them are interested in DNA. So we knew who our audience was going to be. Well, through the magic of MyHeritage photo tools, I was able to take that picture of the 7 sons and turn it into this beautiful colorized photo. And see that dark red background? I love that dark red background, and that was going to be the color of the cover of our book. And we were very fortunate. A cousin came forward and had the 7 sons identified, and they'd been identified by Ernest, one of the actual sons. So we figured he knew who his brothers were, and we felt really good that we now knew who all the people in this picture were. When it comes to writing a book, size matters. In our case, we knew we were going to have a lot of pictures, so we wanted a pretty good size page. Of course, we also wanted to look at our price point and how many pages fit within our price. I worked up sample pages in Microsoft Word and in my graphics program to get the bigger size papers, just to see what a page layout was going to look like before we decided on the final pages. Before you select a size, make sure you look at your publisher and see what page sizes they support and if they have any recommendations for what you're doing. The next thing you need to make sure you know is your time frame. Now, I had a deadline. I had to be able to deliver the book by Christmas. But if you don't have a time frame, make one. Don't start writing the great American novel. Trust me, it will never get done. And if you have sections in your book, you might want to consider also putting section limits in, time limits on your time in your sections. It seems like I'm talking a lot about limits, but limits really help control your project, and they're important. One of the things we had to talk about was how many generations were we going to put in the book. We didn't want to go down to the current generation because, like I said before, once someone had a baby, our book was out of date. And we had some privacy concerns to talk about. So we decided to stop at basically my generation. Now I'm of the age that I could have kids and grandkids. They wouldn't be in this book. Did we want to do all the descendants or just the direct line? Will there be a second volume? Well, of course there will be. This is only a great-grandfather. We'll be doing the lines above him. And then who else can help? Now we are fortunate that we have a wonderful cousin network that we all research and share information readily between us. So we knew that we would be able to get some other help with this, even with this great-grandfather limitation. So we were in great shape. So our limits were that we wanted photos and stories of each child of James Z and their direct descendants. Now, we of course wanted vital statistics, birth, marriage, death. Everyone does. It is a genealogy book after all. And we had an idea of how we were going to deal with that. I wanted a section on DNA because I do a lot of DNA section work, and I thought it was important to show that we could prove that we were actually all related to James Z. And then we've done some really hard research. We have disproved many older researchers' guesses to what our ancestors were and found some very interesting things along the way. So we wanted a little section of what we could put of our early research to try to tweak some interest in the ancestors of James Z. But our number one limitation and our number one goal was that our book not be boring. Remember, our audience isn't genealogists, and we wanted to make sure, as best as we could, that their eyes wouldn't glaze over and the book wouldn't get thrown in the trash. So we wanted to make it interesting for the non-genealogist. So we decided on 7 sections for our book. A descendant chart section, which would handle the birth, marriage, death information and give people a handy visual guide to the complete family or the overall family. An interesting character section, which is a section on each person that we decided to cover. You see, I also included my DNA and my ancestor section, and we added a section that was kind of unexpected, but we wanted an acknowledgement section. We wanted to acknowledge all the other people who helped us with pictures and stories and proofreading and everything else that happened in the book. Every section of the book has a standard layout. This happens to be the first section, the descendant section. And you'll notice there's a colored bar on the side. That makes it easy to find the different sections in the book. There's a graphic that has to do with the title of the section. And then for the descendants section, the very first page is actually a rundown of James Z's family. Now you'll notice there's 11 kids there. There's 7 sons, a son who died young, and there's actually 3 daughters. But this gives you a handy reference for the children, the direct children of James and Rebecca. The descendant chart was the hardest thing I had to tackle in the book. And of course it was the first, which didn't make it any easier. But the standard descendant chart is what we used. The software companies software, the editing software, could not handle all the tabs and spacing in the descendant chart, even if I tried to type it in by hand, which I did not want to do. So I ended up having to run descendant reports out of my software into an RTF format, put that into Microsoft Word, and then I went in and edited and changed the form and fixed the formatting. We took the Gen, most descendants charts say Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. We didn't think that was very friendly to non-genealogists, so we changed that to child. And each son or each child of James Z. and Rebecca Alice McLean start on their own page. Once I got the descendant chart complete and all the proofreading was done, I then saved each page as a JPEG and was able to put the descendant chart into the book layout software as a JPEG. This actually ended up being something very good because I could easily move things around by cutting and trimming the JPEG as I needed to. And I could make sure that all the font was exactly the same size on every page. The second section of the book was interesting characters, and this is where we have pages on each individual. But the very beginning of interesting characters, we had a bunch of pictures of family get-togethers. This happens to be a get-together on a Sunday afternoon. This is not a family reunion, even though it looks like it. It's actually just a Sunday get-together, and it made the paper. So we have that, and pages after this are groups of people, some related, some of people with their friends, and then we go into the individual pages. Each individual page, the name starts on the right-hand side of the book. And I have another wonderful colorized picture here of Orville on a thresher. The graphics we decided to make for the book show the person, their wife, their children, and then their children. It echoes what's in the descendant chart to make it easy to track. Another thing that I found that I needed to do was I talked about Orville, in this case, being a founding member, a charter member of the Delaware County Farm Bureau. Well, if you're not a farmer, you may not know what Farm Bureau is. So I also put a little blurb in there about the Farm Bureau and what the Farm Bureau was, just as a heads up to give the reader a little more information. The author section was just 3 pages long. Jim's was 2 pages and mine was 1. And in it we talked about our genealogy journey, how long we'd done genealogy and the things that we've accomplished, the people who influenced us, especially our cousin network, how we met, because that was an interesting story, and we included current photos of ourselves so the reader would know what we looked like at the time the book was written. In the sources section, we explained how we chose to handle the sources in the book and why. We also chose to put our photo IDs in here, just like the picture of the 7 sons that was identified by Ernest. Well, that's in here with the story of how Ernest did the identification. A lot of thought had to go into the DNA section because we had to remember who our audience was. These folks were not genealogists and they were not interested in DNA, and they had not even taken a DNA test. So I wanted to make the DNA as simple as I could and not take up very much room. The first page of the DNA section is just an overview of autosomal DNA and introducing the concept of a most recent common ancestor, MRCA, in the triangle format. It was very simple and I didn't do a whole lot. The second page, I talked about cousinship and explained cousins and how cousins are related and how you draw that out to find the most recent common ancestor, and gave an example of the cousins in the book. We thought about using a McGuire chart, but realized that that was too complicated and probably wasn't geared to our audience. And we settled on this matrix. Now you'll notice not all the matrix is filled in, and that's because I don't have the match information to all the cousins. But we have enough information here to show that we are all related, and that was the point. The Y-DNA section talked about our testers who have Y-DNA tested, and we talked about the Rutledge Surname Project because Jim and I and some of our other more distant cousins are very involved in the project. And I included a graphic of the Y-DNA. The amount of information that we could put in the Ancestors section was limited by how many pages we had left that we could still meet our price point. But the first graphic shows James Z and his ancestors back to the farthest ancestor that we can prove. Now, we're fortunate in our family that William and Mary were cousins, and so the graphic was very simple and should be simple enough for our audience to understand. The proof arguments that we have in the book and the other information is fully sourced and footnoted. Now, let's talk a few minutes about proofreading. As the descendant chart was done or worked on, I sent it to each cousin for them to proofread their section of the chart. We came up with some interesting facts that we didn't know, and some of the cousins found dates that were missing, and then they went and looked and searched out those dates for us. We actually had a very interesting story come up on a marriage that took us a few days to nail down, and then we decided that it wasn't going to make the book. So the descendant chart was actually being proofed and proofread while the rest of the book was being written. This helped with our timeline. After the cousins proofread the book, after I proofread the descendant section, and the cousins proofread the descendant section, I have a friend who's a retired librarian who loves her red pen, and I gave her a printout of my descendant chart out of my software, which I'd corrected along the way, and then the book descendant chart section, and she went through and corrected it for spacing, spelling, commas, semicolons, all those kind of stuff, and asked us some good questions that we went back and answered. So that really helped a lot. And then I went and printed the charts and went through person by person to make sure that everything was absolutely correct one last time. Now for the book proof, the same librarian helped me, and I had a genealogy friend who also just took a look at the book because there wasn't really a lot of genealogical information there, but I wanted an outsider's opinion. And we decided to leave. One of the things that came up was the stories, and the stories had some grammar and some colloquialisms and some other mistakes in them, and we decided just to leave the stories as they were in the voice of the teller. We did correct some small spelling and grammar mistakes, but we wanted it to sound like the teller's voice. So that was important to us, and that was we didn't even have to really talk about that much. We wanted that in the book. Here's a picture of my table of contents. You'll see I have each section and what page the section begins on, and I have a little blurb about what's in the section, and then just a standard table of contents of the article and the page number. It's very simple, and it was pretty easy to put together. And then when I sent the book to the publisher, I bought one of the cheapest book I could get, an actual physical book that I could get, and we proofread that. And we found a couple of items that were not wrong in the book, but they had been left out of the book that we didn't know, that came to light between receiving that book and the time frame I had to actually get the final drop dead date for Christmas. And we were able to put those items in the book. So we already had version 2 of the book before it ever got delivered to the cousins. And now we come to the title. We had a working title, The Seven Sons, based on the great picture that we had of the seven sons. I even had it all laid out and had my beautiful dark red color on the cover. But one of the proofreaders that we used, his name was Rick, he came back and he said, but Cindy, he goes, the book's not just about the seven sons. I said, that's right, Rick, you're correct. But that's the name of the book. The Seven Sons picture is what started the book. It's the picture that Jim loves. It's the colors that I love. And the name of the book is The Seven Sons. And Rick came back and he goes, but Cindy, there's 3 daughters too. And you're a woman and you should be outraged that the book is about the 7 sons, entitled The 7 Sons, when the 3 daughters and all their kids are in there, especially the one that had 15 kids is in there. And so the title's not right. It can't be just The 7 Sons. Well, I had the only picture I had of the whole family is the one that's there on the right. And no matter what I did to try to edit that and colorize it and work with it, it never came out as beautiful as The 7 Sons. And I couldn't change the title of the book, so then we went, so what? Okay, if it's not The 7 Sons, what's the title going to be? And we all drew a blank. We couldn't come up with anything. We didn't want it to be the family of James Z. Rutledge and his descendants, or the descendants of James Z. Rutledge. It sounded way too much like those standard boring genealogy books that we all see. And I worked and I worked and I worked, and it took me a couple of weeks to come up with something that would work. And there were many conversations and many conference calls between everyone involved. And Rick won. He was right. The book was about the 10 children of James Z. Rutledge, the 10 living children to adulthood. Roy was the little boy who died young, but we had no information on Roy. We had no pictures. We had no stories. We had nothing on Roy. And we weren't even sure if he was a Roy or a Ray. So he just wasn't involved in any of this conversation because we had absolutely nothing on him. But the book ended up being The 7 Sons and 3 Daughters, the family of James Z. Rutledge and Rebecca Alice McLean. And I kept my dark red cover for the book, and the picture of the entire family made the book. Now, whenever I've gone to a presentation or read a presentation about a book or heard someone talk about writing a book, everyone wants to know, how much does it cost? Well, our book ended up being, we did an 8x10 hardcover trade book, which a trade book is just a book that is mass-produced that you see in libraries and bookstores. And my cost was under $40. And they run coupons often, and I was actually able to get it cheaper than that, a lot cheaper than that for my order. The PDF is $5. Now, this is not a regular print to PDF from Microsoft Word. This is a high quality, the pictures are extremely sharp PDF. It's very, very nice PDF. And you can buy an ebook for $10. The next thing everybody wants to know is time. How much time did it take to write the book? Well, I'm retired. I worked on it almost every day, several hours every day, but there were some small gaps when I was waiting for more information or for proofreaders to come back to me. But we started the book. We had some conversations beforehand, but we actually started the book officially, if I will, on the 30th of June. And the last version of the book went to the printer on the 2nd of November. So a solid 4 months with a little bit of work before and after that is how long it took us to write this thing. So I hope you've gathered some good information from this talk, and I hope I've inspired you to go out and start looking for your own inspiration and hopefully actually start that book that we all know is within us. But remember, start small. You can't write the great American novel before you write a short story. You cannot walk until you can crawl. Make sure you identify your audience and keep that in mind all the way through your book. especially a genealogy book, because we all can go off and chase rabbits. Know your size and your money, how much money you want to spend on the book, because how much money you want to spend on the book dictates your size, which dictates your amount of information that can be in the book and will naturally limit you. And lay out your sections and your chapters, but be prepared to change and add and subtract as you go along, depending, again, on the size, keeping within your cost time frame. And even though we had a working title, and we love the title and our inspiration piece, be prepared for that to change at the end, because your title needs to really tell the story that shaped your final book. So here you are again. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation and your eyes aren't glazed over. And I hope I've given you enough technical information and enough inspiration to go ahead and start on that book that you know is in you. If you have any questions, my email's in the handout, and so is a glimpse of the process that we use, so make sure you check it out.